Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. All right. Okay, you guys are awake out there. So first of all, I'm really excited to be here at I.LEAD once again. I want to congratulate the organizers for putting together this event. And for those of you who are here, alhamdulillah, you could be anywhere right now. You could be at home watching Netflix or sitting around reading a book, but you made the decision that you wanted to come out and you wanted to strengthen your Iman and strengthen your commitment to this beautiful religion. And I think that particularly after the horrible incident and tragic terrorist attack that we just saw in New Zealand, I think that these type of gatherings are more important than ever. So I just want to take a moment of silence, if we may, to say Surah Al-Fatiha in honor and to remember and to make a dua for those who we lost a few days ago in Christchurch, New Zealand. Okay. So before we jump into our discussion with the distinguished guests today, I want to acknowledge, of course, that we are on unceded, never surrendered Algonquin territory. It's always very important that we acknowledge that we are on indigenous lands, and to be grateful to each other is to be grateful to the Creator. And so we are grateful to our indigenous brothers and sisters, and we recognize the oppression that they have endured and continue to endure to this day. And we are committed as Muslims, inshallah, to speak out on their behalf. So to begin, I'm going to go to each one of our distinguished panelists and request that before we get too much into the discussion about how we support the development of healthy youth in our communities, before we get too far down this conversation, what do we even mean when we say healthy youth? What are we talking about? What is the frame of reference here? So let's begin, I guess, from right to left. Brother Imad, if you will begin.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi min wala. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this gathering, and as He brought us here today to bring us again in the company of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam in the highest place in Al-Jannah. I think a healthy youth, of course, you can look at it in different ways, but I think it's really important to keep in mind that there's no one particular magical formula that will solve everything. So there are different components that have to be addressed, but if that was to address actually one particular point, and I think this has to be the beginning. And the question is about having a strong Islamic identity. I think that's really where everything starts, and everything else actually is based on that. But when we're talking about an Islamic identity, it does not mean a name or a certain label. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the name, and He gave us the function, because that's really what an identity actually includes. The name is Huwa sammakum al-muslimuna min qabl wa fi hada. He's the one that called you the Muslim, and the function is walakin kunu rabbaniyin. And this is a very important concept. To be rabbaniyin means attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what I mean by that, there are two components to that, is that rabbaniyin attributed to Allah in our goal and in our path. In other words, our goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, and our path is what the Prophet defined for us. And this is the fulfillment, by the way, of the Shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, He's my goal, I worship Him. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, He's my path. Why is that important? Because sometimes we lose that component in trying to fit in as a minority. We try to please everybody and accept everything and everybody. And I think there comes a point when we start accepting certain things, we start losing some of our own. That's why I think that particular aspect has to be established as to who we are and what that particularly actually means.
Okay, so if I can just paraphrase, you're saying that we really have to understand our identity.
Yes, and what it means, what it includes.
And what does it mean? Okay, so we're going to get into that shortly. Excellent. So, Brother Ahmed, how would you define healthy when it comes to talking about our youth?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When I think of the word healthy, I don't think of perhaps in a common sense, in a sense that free of diseases and maybe fit and able-bodied. I think more than that. I think that in terms of their mental health, in terms of their connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of their connection to their surroundings, their balance in their lives, they're balancing school, work, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their obligations towards Allah, their community, their obligations towards the community. So when I think healthy, I think balanced in terms of all aspects of their lives, and I think also in terms of their relationships with everybody around them, their community, their family, their friends, their relatives, all of that being balanced and all under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to govern our lives and conduct our lives.
So key word there being balance, finding that balance. Okay, Brother Ahmed? Which one's Brother Ahmed? Yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So adding like on that point of balance, it's like that's essentially like if we'd be able to manage somehow like to maintain or to aim for us to reach that balance as well, like when it comes to managing like our spiritual well-being or mental well-being and as well as the physical well-being. So like these aspects together. And while at the same time, like trying our best to be as like socially active, like with those around us, like being in good company, and from there, like it would be able to translate, like into a more. It would start from a healthy individual that would then, like gather together and do more healthy things as a group. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brother Noah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam rasulillah. I think following Imam Ahmed's point about healthy not being limited to the physical, I think the health has to be based on something that does not change. Because if our health, as in our mindset and our spirituality and our mental health is based on things that change, our health will change as well. And the thing that does not change is Allah Ta'ala. So if we base our health and our actions and our thoughts upon Allah Ta'ala, that they will not change regardless of circumstance. So whether we have trouble in school, whether we have social media or not, whether we have a following or friends or not, Allah is there, and therefore our health is also there because it's dependent on Allah Ta'ala. So I think it comes down to understanding Him, and through that understanding ourselves as well.
So that dependence. Okay. So these are very important sort of starting blocks, I guess, to begin the conversation. But I often like to take these conversations out of the abstract. So let's take it out of the abstract, and let us again. I am going to come back to the themes and the headspace of what just happened in New Zealand, because I actually want to use that to help us figure out how we support our young people navigating the real realities that they're facing out there. Because for sure, everything you just said makes a whole lot of sense in the abstract. But the reality is our kids woke up, some of them, at 2 a.m. on Thursday night before any of us had even seen that footage, and they actually watched someone go into a place of worship and shoot at point blank range 49 people. And I had young people say to me, they were praying to Allah. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let that happen? And their faith is shaken. Does that mean that they are not healthy? What does that mean? And how do we respond? Dr. Imad.
Jazakumullah khair. This is something not just for the youth, by the way, even the grown-ups. Why it happened, nobody knows why it happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His own plans. And I think it is really important not to go into the why of things, because we're looking for an answer that doesn't exist, that's not available to us. But still the question is, well, they're nice people, how things happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His plans that we're not actually aware of. If you look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was put in the well, he's a nice, righteous kid, the son of a prophet, thrown in the well by his own brothers, and then sold as a slave, and then tempted by the wife of the king and being imprisoned. Why does this thing happen? Now, of course, now we have the rest of the story, we know how it went. But if you were to look at one particular moment, you can't make sense out of the whole story, because you don't have all the information. So what we do in a situation like that, we submit to the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make the best out of it, and we do not look at the why. Because this is the biggest trap to the mind, by the way. Because we don't have the information. Our story is still unfolding. It is not finished yet. So in other words, maybe in 2 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, it may make sense. But for now, we do not. So what do? Is we react to it in the proper way. By responding in the proper way, not to go to the other extreme. By expecting the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By building our community. Because sometimes we think, well, what can we do? Well, there's no quick fix to a problem like that. What you have to do is to build from the base up, to strengthen your community, your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Until then, we just have sabr and expect the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in return.
Okay. So, Brother Ahmed, I know that you work with many youth as well at the MAC Center here in Ottawa. Dr. Imad talks about, for example, using prophetic stories to try to make sense of things that seem really unbelievable. How successful do you find it in speaking to young people to bring up stories of the prophetic past?
Bismillah. So I think of our resilience and our ability to persevere or to be patient or to be strong in face of any kind of adversity, especially adversities that kind of affect our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in and of itself by doubt and questions of doubt and I think of it as a muscle. And the more we train that muscle, the more that muscle is strong and able to withstand, the better it is when calamity hits, when hardship happens. And the reality is that we're told in the Quran that this is a place of tribulation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. And it was a rhetorical question saying, do people think that they will be left alone, that they say they believe without facing tribulation, without facing fitna? So this is dar ibtila. This is a place of hardship, a place of tests, a place where we are put to the test and going through pains and suffering. It's not a bed of roses, as they say. And so how do we face against these tribulations? How do we persevere? How do we withstand? And I think of it, like I said, a muscle that kind of, as the more we train it, the more our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is strong, the less painful the tribulations that we face in life will be. And so, but does that mean that if we do face pain and feel pain and frustration or even doubt or have questions in our mind that we're less healthy? It just means that perhaps we need to work harder. It's just like getting sick. We look for the cure. We look for healing. We look for medicine. We seek consultation. We consult specialists of different kinds to find the actual, reason for these symptoms that exist, the actual root cause for the disease. And once we find it, then we treat it with the actual, corresponding medicine that is suitable for it. So likewise, I think, Allahu Alam, that we need to, when we face any kind of calamity, whether it be shooting here or bombing there or earthquake there or flood here, and these things will continue to happen, that we never lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we constantly try to remedy our souls and our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and strengthen it so that we, when next calamity hits, we're stronger and able to face it, inshallah.
Okay, Brother Nuh, Brother Ahmed, you are in the universities, so you're working with young people I guess of a different generation than teenagers, for instance. They're a bit older, but I suspect some of the distractions are similar. We're talking about finding strength in our faith, giving them medicine, but there's so many distractions out there. So when you're among university students, Muslim university students, how engaged are they in, Muslim events, gatherings? Are they attending Ramadan iftars? Like, if you were to sort of update us, I haven't been in university for some time now. It's been a few years. What's the temperature among the universities? Are young people engaged? And if not, why not? We can start with Brother Noah.
At UArwa, we have quite a few Muslims on campus, alhamdulillah. I'm not sure whether the majority of them take part in our MSA or not. I don't have the exact statistics. However, I don't believe it's a majority on campus. I believe a reason for that may be because of where they came from to university. So not everyone has a healthy upbringing within Islam. People may have family problems, cultural problems from back home, and that kind of stains the viewpoint of Islam on those individuals. rather than stating the people in that context or the places they were from. So I believe we just had our IW, alhamdulillah, past week, Islam Awareness Week at Ottawa. We had around, I think, 120, 140 volunteers coming up every single day for a whole week. We fed about 3,500 people, 500 volunteers across the whole week. And alhamdulillah, we engaged with the broader community about these topics. And so there is definitely people on campus that want the religion and that practice it and that are proud to be Muslims. They're wearing their shirts saying, what is Islam? Come talk to me about it throughout the week, to classes around campus. So they're not ashamed to be Muslim, alhamdulillah. But at the same time, there are those who may not be on the same boat. And I think it comes down to those of us who are more confident within ourselves to pay attention to them and give them sincere and direct attention with love and care, not with a place of judgment, with a place of support, to show them that we really aren't that special and that we're here because of who made us here. I'm where I am because of my parents and my teachers, and nothing else. And I think the humility would help them see the light of Islam within its people, as well as on campus as a whole.
And also like touching on that one as well, it would also be like on the type of events that we would be having. So because again when having Islamic lectures like that would be attracting a certain type of audience. When having, for example, like a movie screening or maybe like a social night, that would attract like a different type, and sometimes like from both. And we'd realize that that essentially people like would have like different comfort levels and also like different levels of faith, and sometimes as well like different level of comfort of their Muslim identity. So like essentially how we'd be starting is that we would want to try and be able to provide like the platforms in order like to try to uplift those who might be like less confident about the Muslim identity, or maybe and essentially by showing them that we don't have to be like, all of us are students, none of us are scholars, to show them that we do not have to be like a certain like level of like of faith for us to be contributing to the community and be good people around us. And again, like, touching again with that, it comes from the point of humility, being there, and trying to listen to people who are around us, like from fellow students. And when it comes, like for example, for Ramadan iftars, like when both MSAs will be holding the Ramadan iftars, there will be different people who might only come during Ramadan. We might only see them during Ramadan, or maybe you might see them like every single time, more common. We try to make it as inclusive of an environment as possible, so that, because everyone, at least at Carlton, everyone would be speaking English. At UOTA, we understand that there is English and French, so we'd make sure that these official languages are the ones used, so that there is no some sort of exclusion for people who are participating, and that there's no like some certain like culture aspect, one cultural aspect that would be associated like with Muslims. And also like it would be upon us youth essentially to try and identify what services and what things can we help bring, and connect the students on campus with the community and general community at large. That's why, for example, like we'd be having the Muslim chaplains who would be at the universities, where because at times some of the youth they they might not be able to, they might not be living close to a masjid, or maybe like they'd be more comfortable for them to be like at the environment of the university, and having as well like from the chaplains who have been like in their shoes like how many years ago, at least that would provide them the the platform to speak their mind. They don't have to go there only for issues. They can go there just for simply speaking, providing that because at the end of the day as well, like when it comes for us like to speak our mind, in general, like there would at times be a stigma. We're saying, oh, why would you go to a chaplain? Why would you go to a counselor? Why would you go to a physician, such and such? They think that the only time you'd go to them is when there is an illness. But it's essentially like you'd go there like if you want to like almost like have a reflection or like try to maintain like a constant maintenance like to our spiritual well-being and our mental well-being at the same time.
Okay. So just to bring it all back in. So far we've heard about the importance of having the stability, of having connections, making connections, looking at our faith tradition for the sort of a sense of solace, of knowledge. Something that I think Brother Nuh said about, for instance, if we look in the university space, there may be a fraction of the Muslim students who are on campus, maybe a fraction, a small fraction, are actually engaged within Muslim community work. Maybe they are participating and the rest of them are not attached. Maybe they show up one time in Ramadan for a free meal. Great, wonderful, come on in. But you don't see them again. And you mentioned something about parents and the role of parents, and maybe they did not have a positive image of Islam as they were growing up. So let's sort of take a step back now and think about, for the parents out there who are raising young children, if I start back with Dr. Imad, what are the necessary, I would say, seeds that need to be planted with our young children to ensure that they have the ability to grow into, strong Muslims with a strong rooted faith, so that by the time, inshallah, that they get to high school and university and beyond, they're not shaky and they're not dislocated from this religion. What are some of the seeds that need to be planted, practical steps that parents right now can implement?
Jazakallah khair. Now, I will be addressing some of that, by the way, in my lecture in the evening, but I think it starts from the basic. A lot of the time, actually, we try to build on a shaky ground. And if you look actually at the path of the Prophet ﷺ, because this is where we get our guidance, that's what defines us as a Muslim, is that we don't have to reinvent everything. It's already that the principles are laid down for us. If you look back at the Prophet ﷺ, his life, you'll find that his life was comprehensive. In other words, he taught us how to deal in times of ease and in times of hardship. They went through ease, they went through the hardship. And he established from the basics up. And that's, I think, what the path actually has to start with, which means there will be sacrifices, by the way. So unfortunately, sometimes we may find some parents that will be so keen on taking their kids to soccer practice or whatever it is, but when you tell them, well, we have a halaqah for the family in here, well, I don't have the time for that. Well, you're sacrificing the more important for the sake of the less important. Which one is going to protect your kid actually better when they're on their own? That's why it has to start from the basic, establishing a strong connection with the deen. What I said earlier is the identity. This is very important. If I may just take a minute, when you talk about, what happened in New Zealand. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba endured a very big tragedy after the Battle of Uhud, where 70 companions were killed and the Prophet was severely wounded. It's very bad. At that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the great verse, and the whole Quran is great, when He said, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not be saddened and distressed, and you are the highest if you are believers. This came after a defeat, not after a victory, to indicate that the attitude of the Muslim, so long as you have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the attitude of the Muslim is not dictated by situations. Regardless, so long as you know what you have that connection. And I think this connection is really what has to be established for the kids, because this is going to be the biggest immunization, the biggest shield to protect them for what is to come next.
Okay, so very good point. So that the need to prioritize is what you're saying, and I think that's such a very important point, because I know that there are so many competing interests when it comes to, how am I going to get my child on the road to success? So we hear so many pieces of advice. You have to put your child in sports, of course, which is true. It's very helpful. You have to give them different languages. Absolutely. Why not? You have to get them exposed to all sorts of different hobbies. Amazing. You have to take them to your relatives. Definitely build the familial bonds if you can. All of that. But parents have finite time, as do their children. And so when you say the word prioritizing, Brother Ahmed, what advice would you have? Because at the end of the day, you can't do everything, and you alluded to that in terms of sacrificing. You know, how should parents, you know, decide what is more important on a practical level, especially, and I should add, when parents do try to put their kids in halakas, and their children would rather be anywhere else in the world than in that halakah at that time. So where does that leave parents?
Jazakallah khair. So it's actually true. Unfortunately, we neglect the portion related to the child's connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Perhaps for those that are practicing, that remind their children to pray, but that it comes down to that. Did you pray Salat al-Asr? And then it's a check mark. But what about the meaning of that salah? What about the feeling that comes out of that salah? What about the connection that comes out of that? What about the khushu' in that salah? That is often neglected, unfortunately. And we spend a lot of time on sports. I have children of my own. I know how that is. Their own school, their education. I think, wallahu alam, there's two responsibilities for the parents here. A, in terms of prioritizing, it depends on the age. So every age has specific needs and specific understanding and specific capacities. When they're younger, they're more playful, they're less inclined to understand bigger concepts. So it's more along the lines of making them love Islam, love the Quran, love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that means that to put some effort in that direction so that they attend activities and functions such as this, where they get to play with their Muslim community, brothers and sisters in the community at their age group, and have fun with them, have some fun activities inshallah in an environment that you feel is safe and secure. And then the other side of things is to protect them from anything that can pull them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything that could affect their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if there is a sports activity, for example, and my son happens to be a teenager, but that sports activity involves things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it be dress code or whether it be foul language or whatnot, then that is not something that we should do. We should actually protect our children from such an environment. If there's some sports activity that, especially you see this with swimming, for example. This is a very practical thing. So in swimming, we try to make sure that the swimming environment is an environment that is acceptable. But also halaqas that they attend. So if I take my children to a halaqah, I need to make sure that the halaqah is not going to push them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by, you know, the angry rhetoric, for example, or the sole mention of hellfire all the time without mentioning the blessings and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Such halaqas can actually push people away from loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and loving the Prophet ﷺ. So that requires protection as well. So it puts a huge responsibility on the shoulder of parents to never give up when it comes to halaqas. So search around, see if there's a halaqah that actually is not acceptable or has things that are, you know, maybe not suitable for the child. Child does not want to, like you mentioned, attend such a halaqah. Maybe try to find others. Maybe try to create your own. Try to participate, be part of the solution as opposed to just complaining or searching for other options out there. So, wallahu alam, I think there's just this double-sided things that we need to, A, put effort into providing you know, kind of a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a venue for them to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and B, protect them for anything that may be out there that may be pushing them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, I'm going to go a little bit off script right now. I just realized I've been sitting for too long and I'm getting a bit tired of sitting. I actually want to open it up to the audience. I think that maybe there are people out there who have some questions that they would like to ask of our distinguished guests. Does anyone have a question? I'll come to you and I'll let you borrow the mic if you like. And this is a good opportunity. So the spotlight's going out. I'm actually going to wander and find someone with a question. And I think that this makes it more interactive. So, does anyone have a question? Yeah, right over here.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for everything. My question goes to the MSA presidents at University of Ottawa and Carleton. I was one of, I'm much older now, but when I was in university, I was in MSA. Actually, I was one of the founding members of MSA, excuse me, at University of Western Ontario. No matter how much you can sit there and say that you are trying to be inclusive, unconsciously or subconsciously, we're not. We have a problem and we have to admit it. At the time, I thought I was very inclusive. 20 years later, I look back and I don't think I was. So I'm trying to relay this message to you. Open the doors. Plant the seed. You're not responsible for what happens to the seed. Just open the door. Someone who comes in shorts, just remind them that the dress code for this event is Islamic dress code. No judgment, no rolling of the eyes. I did these things. That's why I'm telling you that. Someone shows up and they smell like smoking, let's just put it right that way. And I would like to think that our youth are smarter than that, but let's assume you say, you're welcome to come in. However, we would like to remind you, and don't single them out, just as a general statement, this is a smoking-free environment. Just with a smile. It's too bad that I'm admitting this in front of the tens or hundreds of people, but I did these things. You guys are doing it. I don't know about you specifically, but MSAs are doing this. We have to welcome the youth. Now that I'm a mother with 2 youth, I would like to think, alhamdulillah, they're practicing, but I don't know what's going to happen when they go to university. We have to open our doors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have another question over here, another question over here. So, and then I will refer back to get a few responses.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I am a retired high school principal, and I have dealt with a lot of youth over the last 30 years. And one of the things I have found is that youth need to be engaged. Alhamdulillah, you talked about modeling in the family. What do we need to do to transform our masajid and our institutions so that they are welcoming spaces for youth where they are modeled the kind of values that we heard in the first presentation this morning about a moral compass, but where they can actually engage in a positive way and be seen as part of the community, not pushed to the back rows. Jazakumullah khair.
Very good point. We'll take, actually, I'll take 2 more, and then we'll bring it back up for a few discussion points here.
Assalamu alaikum. In workplace, when everybody is not Muslim, so when they ask why these things happen in the mosque, why your God didn't protect you, what should we answer?
Very good question. So I'll repeat that. The sister is asking, how do we respond when people in our workplaces say, why isn't your God protecting you from the type of terrorism we saw a few nights ago? And one more question before we bring it up.
Assalamu alaikum. Just, I think a point was made here that the halakas are the environment for the youth, how to attract them. And I would ask that little bit more explanation or little bit more dive into that point, how to make our mosques and our gatherings more inclusive so that they are welcome. At the moment, as was mentioned, that this place, for example, I.LEAD, or the Friday Mosque, that's one of the most important opportunity for the imams to have a captive audience every week. But I feel that that opportunity is just wasted by telling the stories that are important, but not connecting how they are relevant today, how they are related to these youth. So that is a very important point, and I would appreciate if we had a little bit more discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're definitely hearing a theme emerging so far from the few questions we've taken, and I really appreciate those questions. So let's go to Dr. Imad, and then we'll come back to the university students. Because Dr. Imad, I would like you to maybe share your reflections on this disconnect. I agree, there is quite a bit of a disconnect between our mosques and young people and older people and everyone in between. When I go to the mosques, generally speaking, I am not hearing what I need to hear. And it sounds like other people feel that way. So there may be a disconnect. So if you can address that, and then we'll talk more about the MSA space. You have a mic. Okay.
Jazakumullah khair. See, mashallah, really good questions, but take hours actually to answer, to discuss, because the issue is not really that simple. But I would say, I think the first thing we have to keep in mind is that the mosques do not belong to us. It's not like a permanent ownership. Just like it was given to me, I have to actually have enough trust to pass it to those after me. It is not like once it came to me, it's going to die there because I don't trust the others. And there's nothing wrong with them actually committing mistakes. That's how they would learn. So we're not, sometimes we think that it's like, Islam is like a bucket of ice cream. It's going to melt at any time, it's going to actually be dissipated and disappear. No, it is not. That's why people sometimes are not connected because they don't feel part of the whole thing. That's why sometimes we have to actually get out of our comfort zone and then give them some trust. Just like it was entrusted to me, basically to trust it to the others. But sometimes, and also by the way, not to blindly seek a position or a leadership, because that would be something that will be held against me on the day of judgment if I'm not really prepared for it, if I'm seeking it for a personal reason. The problem sometimes is that we have people that get into the leadership before receiving the proper tarbiyah or training actually for it, to be accommodating to the others, to be open to other opinions, but at the same time to maintain the basics and the foundation. And I think that's really where the challenge is to have the correct understanding, but to put it actually into practice. But to trust the others. It is just not something that belongs to me. Once it gets to me, it dies in there. No, let them make mistakes, it's fine. It's not going to come the end of the religion. It would be perfectly fine.
So are you, sorry, just to clarify, are you suggesting that we should be providing more leadership opportunities for people? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Providing leadership opportunities, but also leadership training, not just opportunity. In other words, we want to give it to the others, but we also want to help them without dictating on them, preparing for that position, but at the end, trusting them with it and giving it to them.
So you're right, this would take hours. The reality is of most of our mosques are being run by individuals who've been there for 20, 30, 40 years. That's the reality that we're facing right now. We're facing a reality that there are no actual structures that allow for young people to come up to take on leadership roles because those roles are not being given up by certain people. And the other issue is that no one is training the young people, and the young people are becoming disenfranchised and turning away from our institutions because they are fiefdoms, essentially.
Let me tell you something. Some people that are stuck in those positions, they end up feeling complacent and they don't work. They don't do that. The best solution to a problem like that is to get involved and start working without seeking a position. Just get to work and then do what you're supposed to do. Eventually, gradually, they would become actually irrelevant. Nobody's going to stand in my way. I don't have to get the permission of everybody to do every single detail of things. That's why I think the challenge is, well, this is my reality. What do I do with it? I don't expect for things to be perfect in order for me to be involved. If they're perfect, there's no need for me to be involved. This is my reality. I deal with it. I try my best. And I do the best way that I can. And eventually, like I said, people that don't work, eventually they're going to fall out of the system. And people that work are going to become actually the ones that are prominent.
You would hope so. So for the MSAs then, there is an opportunity for actual leadership support, but if the MSAs are not inclusive, as was suggested by the young woman who raised it, that she was a founding member of MSA and recognizes, and I think that's so wonderful to be able to reflect on our own behavior, because absolutely many of us make mistakes, many of us, particularly when we're young. It's funny, we often think about those who are not being engaged and absolutely want to think about them, but sometimes there are those of us, I'm not necessarily putting myself in there, but just generally, who are so engaged that we become fixated on this is the way to be a Muslim. This is the way that a Muslim looks. This is the way that a Muslim eats. This is the way the Muslim enters the bathroom. And it becomes so rigid. And in that rigidity, again, you're going to have people turning away. So to the MSA presidents, what do you say to the concern that these spaces are not inclusive?
Starting with immigration, I think a lot of our families are immigrant families. And as a child of immigrants, I want to give credit to our parents for having come here to Canada and establishing a home here. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of us young folk will not face. And with that challenges comes the issues as well. So as immigrant parents, it's about an income, it's about place to stay, it's about the family as well. But I think it's a very hard challenge for our parents. So as youth, we should understand that from our parents. And we should be cognizant of the fact that they did come here, and that they are going through hardship, and that is a reality. From the parents to the children, children will not follow what you say, they'll follow what you do. So if parents are not going to halaqas or learning, the kids will not see the idea of going to halaqas or learning. If the parents get very emotional very fast, the children may also get very emotional very fast. If parents are merciful, kids will be merciful as well. And I think that's a two-way street that happens. In regards to the MSA, it's definitely an issue. And I think I attest the fact that we are, in a way, a clique on campus. A clique on campus. Like as
a clique. So,
yes.
so you're saying the MSA is a bit of a clique? It's
It
kind
can-
of like
yeah.
inward looking?
So as a first year, I didn't understand that, and I did not agree with it. In my fourth year, I can see why it's true. And it is because we do share the same mentality in the MSA. So I think human nature is to be with who you connect with. And that it just happens to be that when we're together, we all think alike. Therefore, to the outside world or people, it may seem like we're a clique, whereas inside we're kind of blind to that reality. And I think like the sister said, it's very true, and it should be resolved. And it starts with not judging people and being open to regardless of whoever comes. And I think to do that, the focus should be on building people. Our Prophet ﷺ spent time in Medina building people. And then the masjid was built, in Mecca building people, then the masjid came in Medina. I think our community is focusing so much on structures that we're forgetting people around the structures. And therefore, we have big facilities with nice gyms and nice big prayer halls, air conditioning. But when it comes down to the people, how many individuals can lead that place? And not many at all. And I think we have to change the focus from building people from building structures to building hearts and building people. And I think that's where it will start, inshallah, like the Prophet ﷺ did with his sunnah.
Brother Ahmed, how do you address groupthink in your MSA? The idea that everyone that's participating thinks alike and therefore are not really able to challenge assumptions and ensure that there is an inclusive space for people.
So one of the ways that could start essentially like when going out there in the different like MSA events or even like the services that would be offered, for example, like the Friday prayers.
Put the microphone up.
Oh, okay. So that would essentially like start with the different events that the MSA would organize, and also like the different services, for example, the Friday prayers. So at times, like what would happen is that like we would see like the regular people who would go and help out with the prayers and help out with certain events, and we'd say, oh, that's it, the situation is being taken care of by those people. And like through being involved like with MSA for like essentially for how many years, like now since my second year, where I'd realized, you know, it's almost like a starting point to a certain degree of almost how some of the institutions like would go, where people like would be there for so many years, and because they knew the structure, like they wouldn't be able, at times, like that's the later point. I'm saying like now, like at the very early stages where where the aim for us is basically to have them involved. So if for example, during Friday prayers, a person wants to help, like with the setup, a person wants to help with the tear down, we would engage them, we'd tell them, come and see, like, and give them that chance for them to participate. We wouldn't say, oh, no, you wouldn't do this, you are not from this, or you're not part of this group, so we wouldn't include you. Because like when doing good things, like we'd want to try as much as we can to include people around us. Yes, we to the point that the sister raised there, where essentially like some of the people, like they might come, I don't know, like wearing shorts, or maybe or like might have a look, maybe like some certain habits that might not like fit within the the framework that is there. like the Islamic framework that we would have, but then at the main point, the first thing we would want to make sure is not to point them out in the middle of the whole setting of the whole group and say, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you coming here? We'd go to them as a side, as a friend. We'd say, what's your name? My name is Ahmed. What's your name? Like what's your so we'd start to build that first bridge first and foremost, and then we would give that advice. We'd try to listen to their side of the story first before putting into the judgment first. And that's something that that we'd sometimes fall fall into that mistake where we directly just judge the person without even trying to listen to their story, to their side of the story. And that's at times like why they might feel like alienated or distant, because they feel, oh, it's like remote judging in a way. And also like touching upon when it comes to how like to parents, like I definitely agree there, like with what Noah said, essentially that the children would do the same as or similar to what the parents would be doing. So for example, like if the parents would be taking their children to a tajweed class, that is good, but also at the same time, it doesn't mean that the parents also would not go to a tajweed class from the first place, because that's essentially how it would be.
The idea that parents have to model as well. So
Yeah.
not only in terms of the Islamic practice, but also in terms of inclusivity, right?
100%.
So even as we're raising our own children, we can talk to them about being inclusive and not making perhaps judgmental points. Okay, I want to go back out into the audience and get a few more questions. We still have about 25 minutes left of this session, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to explore various themes. And there are lots of questions out here. So I'm going to wander around. We'll take a few.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is regarding the incident that happened in New Zealand or any such sort of Islamophobic things that we see in society. When we first hear about it, the gut reaction may be one of it's very upsetting, it may be anger or hatred or whatever. Adults may be able to process that, may be able to simmer down rationally. Youth may not be. So, especially for teenagers, how do you talk to them when they've witnessed something like this or when they've seen something like this, especially because now it's very visible than maybe 10 years ago? Because A, they may not talk to you, because they may talk to the people of their own age group, which sometimes ends up being an echo chamber, and that negative feeling is magnified. And B, well, first, how do you start the conversation? And B, what do you say? How do you have that conversation? And this question is both from an adult perspective and from the MSA, which would be more interacting with that age group. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Very important. We'll come back. We started off talking about it, but we will go. There's more to say, I'm sure. I saw another hand up here.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair for your input. And I'm only new to Ottawa for a couple of years, so I'm fairly a newbie here. And mashallah, I see a lot of wonderful communities in terms of Muslim communities around me. I want to give a comment and then a question, if that's okay. A shout out to my mosque. My local mosque is SNMC. And my kids, I have kids in both age groups. I have teenagers and I have younger kids. And the SNMC mosque has been very youth-centered. And I think I hope more, inshallah, from the comments and the questions that are being relayed here, that there are people in our community that are part of Muslim community centers as well as mosques in the area that are hearing the parents screaming in thirst, asking for more opportunities to engage our teens and our youth in getting them confident and also trained up to be Muslim leaders of the community. But I also want to say that it's also the parents' responsibility in that I feel like we wait for things to happen. But if you feel like your community center or your mosque is not giving those opportunities, we should reach out to the leaders and suggest these things and create these opportunities for our children. So instead of us waiting for these things to happen, let's create it, inshallah. My question was related to the confidence, piggybacking off of not just necessarily an Islamophobic event or anything like that, But just as our children, alhamdulillah, they're practicing Muslims, with everything else that's going on in the environment, how do we raise confident Muslims? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about raising confidence in that. Alhamdulillah, we might have kids, we have kids that are practicing Muslims, they wear their hijabs, they're doing their daily prayers, they're attending halaqas, but it comes out to the public when they go into public high schools or public universities, and as a parent, I want my children to be confident, and that they're not ashamed of their religion or afraid of saying that they're Muslim. How do we engage to make sure that they get that confidence, inshallah, so that they're able to, be good leaders of the community, inshallah?
Okay, so we'll take 2 more questions at that microphone over there, and then we'll bring it back to the center. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair. It's a very insightful and inspiring dialogue that I hear here. So I have 2 questions. So first is a little bit high level. We zoom out and we see, we're talking about the youth, and there is at least two factors: internal to the Muslim community and external from outside to the Muslim community that could be contributing to our community and to the youth specifically. And my question here, where to start from? So there is social pressure, whether it's passive or active, whether it's types of trying to push to the mainstream, or to try to marginalize or discriminate against certain races or certain colors or certain way of life that we have in the community. And this, I believe, contributes a lot to the identity of the youth. So that's one, and versus how much attractive and inclusive and engaging and leadership building our community is. And we understand that our community is an immigrants, and we have never built communities before, a lot of us, at least the Middle Easterns. So we're still in the infancy in terms of building communities. So that's first. So how should we actually start first from trying to address Islamophobia and trying to change the culture around us to be more inclusive on all levels, whether on grassroots or the high decision-making level, policy making, and versus just focus on blaming our first generation, or otherwise finding ways we can actually optimize within the boundaries, the fixed circumstances that we have from outside, fix them and not.
Can you get to your second question, please?
Sorry?
Can you just get to your second question?
Yes.
What's your second question?
So the second question is, do you see that shaping the identity of the youth, how should we actually shape the identity of the youth? Should we try to help them become leaders and try to make them changers, or should we make them aim to make them just good worshippers? That's just like we see the best Muslim is.
Thank you.
Thank you. So.
Okay, there's one more question, and we'll bring it back.
Assalamu alaikum. This question is for the MSA presidents. I've been at the University of Ottawa for 7 years now. So I've got to see a lot of MSAs come and go, a lot of presidents come and go. But the one thing that has been consistent throughout those 7 years is that we have sisters at the MSA, in the MSA, and at the University of Ottawa who are phenomenal and who are phenomenal leaders. But the one thing that we've never been able to have is a sister at the head of the MSA, as president of the MSA. And I know that that's something that's been brought up before, but we have harbored an environment where sisters are not able to take those leadership roles. So in my opinion, I think we have more than enough sisters who should be sitting up there in positions of leadership, just like Amira, having this conversation and helping us all move forward in order to be more inclusive. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have, again, the full gamut. It's a good thing we still have about 15 minutes left of the session, and we are going to do our best to sort of do a laser round on some of these very deep issues. Let's start with the most recent question, the sexism issue and the issue of patriarchy in our institutions. If we are encouraging our young people to feel attached to our communities, how are we going to talk to young boys and young girls about how they are going to engage with one another and with the broader society as proud, confident Muslims when there is unfortunately some misconceptions and misunderstandings about the role of women in our communities? Dr. Imad.
Another big question. Everybody's looking for a key answer, a passepartout, for everything. The problem, of course, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the believers, He addresses both. It includes both. But sometimes we have a certain idea or mentality that basically, sometimes not just man, one woman, sometimes basically I versus the other, that I'm the only one that can do a good job. And of course, I'm not familiar with the dynamics, by the way, here in Ottawa, but I can tell you in California, we don't have that issue. We don't have that problem as to who's heading the MSA or also who's heading some of our organizations. So I'm hoping that we really past that. And subhanAllah, sometimes, you find when you exclude the sisters, you're excluding basically half of the population that can contribute. I mean, you want to choose basically from a bigger pool as to who's best fit, whether brother or sister. So you don't want to exclude basically half of your pool, because actually that may be what actually brings you the significance to your organization. And sometimes we have that idea, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always addresses both. And there's one particular hadith that we quote much of the time, by the way, where the Prophet says, مَا فَلَحَ قَوْمٌ وَلُّوا شُؤُونَهُمْ امْرَأً. But this hadith has a context about what was happening actually in Persia. But you'll find actually Umar ibn Khattab alayhi ridwanillah actually given the leadership of the market to a lady, to a woman basically in there. So in other words, it is not really that much of a concern so long as the person who's doing the job is really qualified to do that without defining him based on his gender, ethnic background, or anything else.
So in the MSAs right now, Brother Noah, you're at University of Ottawa, so I think that comment was directed specifically at you, but I went to Carleton University, just of course a short few years ago, and the MSAs were struggling to ensure gender representation. So to both of you, how do you ensure that women are not sort of sidelined instead of being provided a fulsome, equal space at the table?
I think there's a correlation between the brother's question and the sister's comment on confidence. Because I think when people are confident, they are true to themselves and they don't take on veils that aren't supposed to be there. So when it comes to confidence, there was a book I was reading by Michael Sujic called The Heart's Turn, where he says in the book that he quotes a famous Maliki scholar, Ibn Atala al-Iskandari, saying, if you do not believe that in the next moment God can turn you into one of his closest friends, one of his awliya, then you are ignorant of his power. And I think the problem is the ignorance there, and that the solution for ignorance is knowledge. And when people have knowledge of their deen, of their religion, they are confident people. And I think one of the facts of our community is that a lot of us don't know our deen as we should. How many of us have studied aqidah, for example, on a very basic level, fiqh on a very basic level, not as much as there should be maybe. And so I think the answer to confidence is seeking that knowledge, whether it's aqidah or fiqh or whatever it may be, but understanding Allah, who He is, and how His existence relates to us, and how we can be the best servants to Him. Now relating to the question about men and women, I think when men are not confident in themselves, they become, what shall I say, they assert a sense of, how should I say this, a toxic mentality, as if we are the elect, and the girls are kind of sidelined. So, to compensate, as Ahmed is saying. So I think that it relates to that kind of a mentality. And I think, of course, I agree with Ahmed that sisters should run for the presidency and they should get it and they should lead the people on campus. But it's hard to change culture. And it takes a long time to change it. So Carleton had their female president, Sister Biftu, I think last year, the year before. And that's very good for them, alhamdulillah. That was beautiful. And I think that it took some time for that context to change. And I think that we have to work on ourselves as individuals to make sure we're confident in who we are as Muslims rather than as men or as women. And then we'll move towards having that kind of equality in the leadership roles. Yes.
Okay, Brother Ahmed, how do you ensure that women feel, so do you have a president right now who's a woman? Is that what you said, or a vice president?
No, last year
you had a female president?
And this year pretty much like 3/4 of the exec team are females.
3/4 are women?
3/4, so pretty much like 6 execs are women and 2, myself and the VP services are males.
So how has the reaction been from the wider Muslim sort of campus space to all of these women taking leadership roles? Has there been any reaction, or are we starting to move towards California, which I hope means we'll get California weather? What's the reaction to that?
So essentially, you know, like when allowing like women to take leadership, yes, we would definitely like want to allow that, and also like, but that does not mean that we should basically like just go away, like flee away. It means to make space for us to allow that to happen. At times, when like when it comes to the mentality, we're speaking about the times like some would be fearing that's it, like there is no more space for people to be involved. At the very beginning, like it doesn't have to start by an actual like a position. It doesn't have to start like that. It could start by being like a general volunteer and slowly, step by step by step. That's one way. And doesn't have to be directly diving into the main. The main point would be is to actually to allow that space to happen. And for example, like for Islam Awareness Week, like we have more than half of the volunteers are female. Like the majority of them are females who are there, which is amazing. And now the question with that, it wouldn't mean for brothers to stop like contributing to society. It means for them to allow sisters to be there. And of course, like with that, we would want to make sure that that there is there is respect in the interaction that happens there, and to allow them to give that space for them. Inshallah.
Okay. So that's good news. That's really good news. And everyone heard it here at I.LEAD that at Carleton they have 60-40, 80-20 in terms of female representation on their exec team. So that's amazing. That's really good to hear. And I'm happy to hear that that everyone has a space at the table. I want to, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about different forms of racism, because I think one of the questions addressed that our young people are not only dealing with all of these things, and we're talking about such a myriad of topics, but along with Islamophobia, along with the pressures of the broader society, there are also other forms of racism. There's anti-black racism that is a big issue that we have to talk about. There are other types of racisms between other communities as well, between Arabs and non-Arabs, et cetera, et cetera. And I would like to maybe come to Brother Ahmed and ask him, are we having those conversations in a frank and open way with young people? Are we talking about racism?
Not as much as we should. And so we see within the Muslim community, we see stigmatization, we see racism, we see discrimination. It's an unfortunate reality. Now, actually, I think a lot of these problems, and I ask my elders to forgive me, but are imported problems that kind of, we brought baggage that we carried with us, and unfortunately kind of is taking a little while before we kind of sift through that luggage and choose that which is really a gem and should be maintained, and throw away practices that may be cultural, that have nothing to do with Islam. I think it'll just take some time. But the reality is that as we're doing that, I think, like you mentioned, more conversations need to happen, more recognition of the problem needs to happen. Even if we don't have, a magical solution yet, or because it is a complex issue and it requires a lot of time to kind of deal with. But the conversations, the discussions, the reality that we were recognizing this as a problem and an issue, I think just having those is a healthy thing, because it also provides some consolation, a glimmer of hope for those that suffer at the hands of discrimination or racism within the Muslim community, to realize that, you know what, it is a problem that exists, and they're dealing with it, inshallah, and there are others that are talking about it, and so they don't feel that sense of alienation and don't get pushed away from the masjid. So I think the more we talk about it, the more our brains can kind of unite, and the more we can try to find solutions for these issues. The reality is, the closer we are to the prophetic model, and I hope that Dr. Ahmed, inshallah, will talk to us about that later on today, the closer we are to the prophetic model, the more we realize how certain cultural practices and ways of doing things are not applicable anymore, especially here in Canada with our very, very diverse Muslim community. Perhaps the most diverse community in Canada is the Muslim community. And so we need to kind of recognize, how did the Prophet ﷺ deal with diversity, ﷺ? And did he, ﷺ, see skin color? Was it an issue? Was it a factor? And I'm reminded, subhanAllah, by a story, and this is one of the things that I think you asked, that how do these stories relate to the issues of today? And I think that many of them do, actually, if we really shed some light on them in a way that kind of allows lessons to be relevant to our day-to-day. One simple story is when an instance or a situation of racism happened, where a Sahabi had a fight with Bilal radiallahu anhu. And we know Bilal was black, he was from Abyssinia originally, and so he was cursed by the other Sahabi, the other companion, that called him and said, "You are the son of a black woman." And Bilal was upset, even though it's true, he is the son of a black woman, but it was said in a derogatory way, and it was very insulting. And so Bilal went to the Prophet and complained about this, and the Prophet said to the Sahabi that said this, "Innaka imri'un fika jahiliya." You are a person in whose, self there is ignorance, there is, acts from the time before Islam. Prior to Islam coming, these were things that were commonly said. It's not acceptable anymore. The Sahabi immediately turned back, and he was really upset of what he said, and he went to Bilal and he put his head to the ground and he said, "Bilal, step on my face. I ask you to forgive me." And Bilal told him something really profound. He said, "The forehead that makes sujood for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I cannot step on such a face, so please rise up." And they hugged. And such a story like that kind of symbolizes that there are mistakes that happened. There was, certain kind of symptoms of racism that existed even amongst the Sahaba, subhanAllah. And it was immediately recognized, immediately addressed by the Prophet ﷺ. Likewise, I think we all need to kind of take that prophetic model. And when we see any instance of racism, any kind of, odd look or discriminatory comment, anything like that, we should call it out. We should not be silent. We should not be quiet about it. We should immediately address it and say, brother, this is not something that's good. This is not something from Islam. That Islam teaches us to look beyond all that our bonds as brothers and sisters in Islam transcends all colors, all ethnicities, that we have something unique as a Muslim community compared to any other community out there. And that is that our love towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that transcends all that. Allah.
So we are just coming now to the conclusion of this discussion, and I know it's been actually a long panel, but we've only, I guess, scraped the surface, and there are many more sessions throughout the day that are going to be, I think, going after some of these issues in even more depth. So certainly I hope that everyone will stick around for all of that. I think if I may just ask for some closing remarks. We started off acknowledging what happened in New Zealand, the tragedy that occurred, and I think that I'd like to sort of maybe invite each of the speakers to share their own personal reflection on that terrible tragedy and terrorist attack, but how should we move forward now with our children as related to some of the questions we heard as well. How do we move forward? We addressed it at the start, but let's go a little bit deeper. How do we move forward? How urgent is it now, more than ever, for us to give our children a sense of security, that it is okay to be Muslim, that it is okay to wear a headscarf if you choose to, or it's okay to have a name like Muhammad or Ahmed or Fatima or any of these beautiful names that we have? How do we instill that love? And if you could, of course, do that in 30 seconds to a minute, that would be phenomenal. All right, so we'll start from Brother Ahmed and then work down.
So, like one of the main ways that we can do that is, for example, like for actually like for us to be coming to this conference, like for parents to be bringing their children and youth as well, for them to come with their friends, like that is what one of the main ways is for us to learn more about the religion. But also like at the same time, it's like for us to recognize that the masajid, you know, like when building, like the goal of building like a masjid, it essentially like would be like to worship Allah, but and to worship Allah and also to build a community around it. The goal, like when building a masjid or even like building that community, it's not mainly to just build it, because the moment that we set that as the goal, the moment we reach it, we wouldn't know what's the later step. So as long as we have that as a continuous process for us to develop the youth, to give them responsibilities, and at the same time holding them accountable for it, that would develop confidence within them. It would be able to instill that leadership within them. They don't have to start by putting like a specific like position for them, but at the very least, actually, if it doesn't exist, but opening those doors and allowing them to come into the masajid, to come to the community in general, to bring their friends and to be more welcome to that, while at the same time for each of us youth basically to remind one another, to act as reminders to each other, like about the religion and about the Muslim identity, to hold each other up strong in these times as well. Thank you.
Sheikh Muhammad ibn Jafar al-Qatani wrote a short poem on Aqidah, where he says, وَجَائِزٌ عَلَيْهِ فِعْلُ مَا يُمْكِنُ أُتَرْكُهُ فَلْتَعْلَمَا لأنه سبحانه فريد في ملكه يفعل ما يريد. That the jaiz and the possibilities of God for what He can do is that He can make or He can take away. For there is no obligation upon God, and in His dominion He does what He wills. And therefore, from a sense of soul and how we believe in Allah Ta'ala, when we come and we prepare ourselves for these actions, the resilience and the trust in Allah should not waver, because that's different. However, as Muslims, we must be there for our fellow Muslims. Therefore, our bodies and our eyes and our hearts, they cry for these people. And we pray that Allah Ta'ala bring safety and comfort to the people of New Zealand and the families as well, and that they take care of them, and we're here praying for them, inshallah. But there's a distinction between what our soul feels for Allah Ta'ala and how we respond to these actions. And that comes back to knowledge. And therefore, I think for parents and for all of us, it comes back to teaching our children and our fellow people knowledge of Allah Ta'ala, and the knowledge of Him, of His beliefs, and how we believe in Him, and how we practice that belief through fiqh, and following the Prophet ﷺ in today's context.
Bismillah. So I struggle with this question because how do I deal with it myself? Even, when I woke up in the morning the next day, I was actually kind of in denial the night before. It didn't register, and then the next day is when it actually registered, and that's when I woke up with a really heavy heart, and I felt really frustrated, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. But then, subhanAllah, I was reminded with one of the words of one of my teachers, where he was talking about Islamophobia. And he was saying that it is actually normal. It's normal to have Islamophobia. In fact, if we don't have Islamophobia, then something's wrong, something's off. It's normal to have people that would hate Islam and hate us. And he reminded me of the words of Waraq ibn Nawfal to the Prophet ﷺ, where he says to the Prophet, I wish I were to be young when your people kick you out of Mecca. And the Prophet was surprised at this. He says, Awa mukhrijiyahum, would my own family, my own people kick me out? I've been living with them for 40 years. Neighbors, friends, colleagues, partners at work, people that I know my whole life will kick me out of my own home? And then Waraq said something profound that registers, I think, with us till today. He says, مَا جَاءَ أَحَدٌ بِمِثْلِ مَا جِئْتَ بِهِ إِلَّا عُودِي. Nobody comes with such a message as this, except he or she would face animosity. Nobody calls for equality except he or she would face hardship and pain and animosity at those that benefit from inequality. Nobody comes with a message of justice except he or she would face hardship at those that benefit from injustice. Nobody calls for tolerance except those that benefit from intolerance will attack him or her. Nobody calls for the peace and harmony that we call for, that our message calls for, that Islam calls for, except he or she would face hardship at those that benefit from war. And there are industries that benefit from war, from inequality, from the degradation of women, from intolerance, from injustice, from corruption. And these industries, all of them, pour money into the Islamophobia industry. So I think step number one is for us to realize this reality of life. That one of the rules of engagement of existence is that there will always be people that are against Islam, people that are Islamophobic, people that have hate in their hearts, people that are quote unquote acting in an evil way. It will always be the case. When will there be a time where there's no more evil, no more hardship, no more pain, no more suffering, no more death? In Jannah, inshaAllah Rabbil Alameen. So that's the one. Two, I think, and that's the last point, is to actually realize that Islamophobia is real and it has an influence and an effect, so that a spokesperson in the United States influences a criminal person that has room in his heart for hate to act across the oceans, across the seas, all over in New Zealand, subhanAllah. That realization makes us realize that we can't be silent in face of Islamophobia. We need to speak out. We need to be involved. We need to speak against, not just against Islamophobia, but against racism, against people that are against the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to speak for the rights of those that are the indigenous, Canadians and people that are around us. We need to speak again for those that are in need of a voice. We need to participate. We need to be involved. We can't just cocoon ourselves in our home. And that's exactly what the Islamophobes want. That's exactly what the terrorist wants from New Zealand. He wants to plant fear in our hearts. Otherwise, why else was he filming that horrible act? It was just to show it to us, to plant fear in our hearts, and that we should never allow that to happen, inshallah.
SubhanAllah, what happened, of course, in New Zealand is really tragic, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept those that died as shaheed and to give a speedy recovery to the wounded. But I think if we've never had a discussion about a similar topic, I think that's problematic. I think a discussion like that should be raised regarding what's happening in Palestine, in Syria, in China, in Myanmar, all of these things, with one thing to indicate that hardship is part of life. And this, I'm not saying that to accept it without doing anything about it, but to accept that things like that do happen. How easy or how difficult your life is not a measure of how much Allah likes you or dislikes you, or of how much you are in the truth or you're not. This is not a measure of that. The Prophet ﷺ himself had a very difficult life. And Allah says in Surah Al-Fajr, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ وَأَمَّا إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانًا. That the human being thinks that when good things happen to him, he will say, oh, Allah likes me. Or when bad things happen to him, he will say, well, Allah does not like me. And then comes the answer in the next verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَلَّا بَلْ لَا تُكْرِمُونَ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا تَحَضُّونَ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. This is not the reality. So how easy or how difficult your life is not a reflective of whether you have the truth or not, or how much Allah likes you or dislikes you. Otherwise, Allah would like all of us more than He liked the Prophet ﷺ. He had a very difficult life. So this life is a land or a life of testing. This is not a life of reward and punishment. What matters at the end is what happens later on. We're trying to deal with what happened actually in this world. Well, at the end, I would like to apologize to my brothers and sisters that are sitting in the back. We're turning our back to them, but this is the way the stage actually is set up. But inshallah, you can see us in the screen. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you. Thank you, Bismillah, inshallah. Okay, so if I may conclude, as I was listening with everybody to the comments throughout this panel, if I may humbly offer some advice to myself as a parent as well, and to all of you. Surah Al-Asr is a very powerful surah, as all of them are, but there is a message in Surah Al-Asr that I actually think if we implement with our children, we may address some of these topics. And it's the fact that Surah Al-Asr talks about believing but also doing actions. So while going to a halaqah is important, while receiving this knowledge is important, each of the speakers talked a little bit about actually doing things, taking our children, going to a food bank, going to a local church to listen and share the message. There's so many different things. Volunteer Ottawa is an organization that has many different activities that we can do with our kids. You know, there's a very known saying, show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. So instead of us lecturing at our kids nonstop, let's just stop talking and start showing them what to do. So if I may, I'm going to end on Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal-Asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Thank you very much. See you later. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.